Welcome everybody to week 6. This week we'll be covering chapter 6 and 7. We'll begin with chapter 6, off to school, cognitive and physical development in middle school. And chapter 7 will be expanding social horizon, socio-emotional development in middle school. So this week is all on middle school. We're just going to look first at cognitive and physical development, and then when we go to chapter 7, we'll look at the socio-emotional development. So let's begin. So to begin with, we're going to look at different cognitive changes that take place during a child's school years. Can you think of any? How do schools accommodate children with special needs? What are some ways to foster children's learning? So how do we help children learn, right? This is really important right now with all of us doing online learning. How do we foster children's learning? And how do schools serve children's physical needs? So we're going to dive right in. So we're going to begin with Piaget's concrete operational stage. You're going to think, what is the difference between a preschooler, early childhood, and a middle schooler? More sophisticated thinking, right? They can be more logical. So we're going to look at concrete operational stage. So this is approximately ages 7 to 11. And that's a pretty big range. A 7-year-old is definitely different than an 11-year-old, but it's a journey, right? It's a range. So as that 7-year-old comes and experiences this phase, by the time they're 11, they should reach all the goals in this phase. So what happens in the concrete operational stage? So the first thing is that egocentrism decreases. So remember that egocentrism in the 2 to 6-year-old is about me, and all that. So now experiences with others are going to start to play a role. So experiences with others who assert their perspectives on the world. So they're going to start to hear what other people can do and then kind of relate to their world as well. They're going to have realization that appearances can be deceiving, right? Everything's not going to be literal. So that events can be interpreted different ways, right? So everything is not always what it seems. So they're going to start to realize that, where a 2 to 6-year-old may not. They may just think face value. If they see, someone on the ground, they may think that, oh, they really, really hurt themselves, but they could have just, be laying on the ground doing something else. So appearances can be deceiving, and that's when they start to realize that events can be interpreted in different ways. Number 3, they acquire mental operations. So what that means is that actions that can be performed on objects or ideas that consistently yield a result. So mental operations, you want to think of when they were pouring those liquids. Remember when those videos? They now realize that the amount of liquid is the same no matter what size or shape of container. The liquid, if you pour it in a different container, it's the same. This is when they realize that. Concrete operational stage. And they can change it and pour it back into the original beaker. So no matter what the size, the original liquid is the same. So that's that mental operation. They are beginning to think things through. Abstract thinking has not yet emerged, though. They can't think of the what ifs. So what if I, didn't brush my teeth for 10 years? What would happen? They can't quite grasp the full complexity of abstract thinking, all the what ifs. They are definitely, things are tangible, they're real, and they're in the here and now. But they can start to understand other people's experiences and, change their reactions to it. They can begin to see that events can be interpreted in different ways. They start to use their mental operations. They can start to understand that liquids, no matter what size beaker you pour it in, it's the same amount of liquid. But the big difference here is that, remember, that abstract thinking has not yet emerged. So all what ifs. They can't get to the what ifs yet. Everything is still tangible and real and in the here and now. So part 2 of middle school is age 11 to adulthood. And that's a huge range. Remember, this is a range. So an 11-year-old is not the same as an adult. It's a range. And again, we're thinking that more sophisticated thinking, Piaget's ideas. So the first thing we're going to see in this formal operational period is they're going to be able to apply psychological operations to abstract entities. So one thing you can think of, when you're in a concrete operational stage, a child can begin to start mixing liquids to get a result. They know that if they mix certain liquids, they might create a blue liquid. They may not know how that's done. The difference now is in formal operational. They can hypothesize. They can think about what different combinations of colors do I need to put together to get blue liquid. So they can start thinking about the one thing at a time. They can start preparing for identifying possible combos and evaluating each one and their success. So that's that hypothetical thinking and abstract reasoning. So the big difference between concrete operational and formal operational is that they can apply those psychological operations to abstract entities and perform hypothetical thinking, the what ifs, and the abstract reasoning. So they can, start to formulate hypotheses. They can start to think about the future. And, if I study really hard, I could become a doctor. If I take care of myself and my health, I could become, I'll be healthy in my 20s and 30s. Why do you think it's so hard for, if you meet someone in their 20, maybe in their earlier, maybe 12, 13, 14, they don't necessarily see the consequences of their actions. So if you tell them, don't start smoking because, in 30 years, you're going to have lung cancer, they may not quite grasp that full reasoning yet. They're beginning to see that. So if you told by the time they're an adult, they should be better at it, right? If you told that to a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, don't smoke because you could get cancer 30 years ago. 30 years from now, that might not scare them as much. So it's the what ifs. They can start to do the what ifs. And remember, an 11-year-old, probably 15, 16, 17, they're going to be able to really use that abstract thinking. Another thing is deductive reasoning, and they make appropriate conclusions from facts. And that involves hypothetical thinking and following through with logic. So we all use deductive reasoning in our lives. So we know that if we hit the glass, that it's probably going to break, right? So if we know that, we can deduce, hitting the glass with a hammer is not a good thing. So if you saw that in some of the, when they were doing the videos of that thinking of, oh, if I told you a wrong fact, like when they said, hitting the hammer is going to make it soft and the other kids couldn't understand it. Now we realize, deductive reasoning, I know that hitting something with glass is probably going to break. So if I hit a window with, a hammer, it's probably going to break. If I hit, a glass you drink from, it's probably going to break. I can deduct that reasoning because I know that facts, that hard surfaces that hit glass will break. So I'm performing logic, reasonable thinking. I'm basing that on my experience in the world. I'm formulating those ideas through the knowledge that I've gained. I'm understanding the abstract thought, and I'm correctly making a hypothesis and an action based on fact and what I've seen in the environment. So it's a higher level of thinking that is different from the formal operational than the concrete operational. So now we're going to look at information processing strategies for learning and remembering. So basically what this means is how do you take or how do children take information in and save it in their memory banks and then pull it out later for when they need it. For an example, how do you study for a test? How would a children study for a test? Which are ways that you remember large information or facts? So let's take a look. So what do you guys think? So one of the most basic ones is children begin to use basic strategies such as rehearsal. What do you think that is? Right? We just practice, repetitively naming information to be remembered. So however you do that, saying it out loud, reading it over and over, any way that you rehearse it and practice. Other memory strategies as we get older, we do organization and elaboration. So the most basic one, remember, is rehearsal. And then as you get older, you actually start doing memory strategies. So I want you to think, how did you study for this last test? Do you remember some of the strategies I taught you to try to use? So organization is structuring information so that related information is placed together. So you're going to put stuff together so it makes sense, so that when you're remembering it, trying to remember it for that exam, it makes sense. So one of that may be like, if I want to memorize the major battles of the, Civil War. I might place them in alphabetical order and then study that. Because then I'm going to be like A, B, C, C. Yeah, there's 3 C's. I remember there's 3 C's. Okay, I'm organizing the information that makes sense and easy to remember. You can organize it geographically. So if I wanted to, that same thing, I want to memorize the battles of the Civil War. I can memorize them by state. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, all those different ones. I can organize it by state, or I can organize it chronologically by year. So I could say, okay, the first one happened 1667, 68, So there's different ways you can organize it, but just if you have a system of organizing information so it's easily remembered and you can pull it out of your memory. Another one is elaboration. So embellishing information to make it more memorable. So one example, how do we trick ourselves into remembering stuff? So one example is like, how do I remember how to spell Wednesday? So I'm going to embellish it. It's how I remember how to spell it. I always say Wednesday. Oh, it's Wednesday. That's just one way I remember. When you sing songs, like there's a example when I still remember to this day, when I was in 5th grade, all the states of the United States, because I sang a song called Nifty 50 Nifty United States, and it embellished the information. It put it in a song to make it memorable. So lots of different ways we remember. Highlighting a book, taking notes, and then practicing and rehearsing, organizing those things. So just remember, organization, elaboration. Organization is organizing in a way that makes sense, alphabetically, chronologically, geographically. There's some examples. Elaboration is embellishing information. So like, I'm going to over exaggerate a word. I'm going to put a story, with the saying. There's for you guys that are going into nursing, to remember the cranial nerves. And yet again, I learned this at BC when I went to BC and took anatomy. It's, on old Olympus towering tops, a fat ass German view to hops. And that will tell me every single cranial nerve. I still remember that because that's elaboration, because I put, I put meaning to those letters, and I have a little rhyming thing and song with it. So you can combine these and do them together. Just remember, rehearsal is basic. Organization and elaboration is a higher thinking strategy that's going to be coming later on. Maybe not an 11-year-old might not see it, but you might see it later on in middle school and toward young adulthood. So remember, specific memory strategies are better for certain types of memory problems, right? Not one thing fixes all. And knowing which one to pick is going to help you study so much better, right? You're going to remember things so much better. So for an example, rehearsal for a string of numbers or outlining for reading a textbook is a good way to remember that. Children must choose a strategy and determine whether it is effective or not effective. And you need to know which is the best way for you to learn. And if you're not picking the right strategy, then maybe that's the first thing you need to look at. Why am I not remembering this? Well, what kind of strategy am I using, and is it the right one for what I need to do? So if I'm trying to rehearse while I'm reading a textbook, maybe that's not the best thing. Maybe I should outline and then rehearse the outline. So that's the first thing you need to look at. The second thing here we're talking about is meta memory. And that's a child's intuitive understanding of memory. So like we have naive theories of physics and biology. Basically, that's the naive theory of memory. And it begins in preschool, and then, it progresses and evolves as they get older. It's being able to evaluate what you know and not know. So it's being able to say, oh, I know how to do this, but I don't know how to do this. It's realizing that there are things that you don't know. How many times how do you know what, I've been like, if I just would have known, I would have done that, or I would have studied that. I just didn't know, even it exists. So it's that ability to know that I know things, and then there's other things that I don't know. And children gradually become more skilled at this, and they get better as they get older, but they still have difficulties in their teens. It's definitely something you're going to see really mature as they get closer to adulthood. So it's helpful in diagnosing memory problems accurately and monitoring effectiveness of memory strategy. So it's how well they can perceive, am I remembering what I know, and realizing there's things that I don't know. So here's another fancy word, metacognitive knowledge. So again, this is all under information processing strategies. So that's knowledge and awareness of a cognitive process. So in other words, I'm thinking about thinking. Right now I'm doing that as I'm giving this presentation. So I'm thinking about the things that I need to think about. It's kind of a really high concept. And so you can't imagine a 2 or 4-year-old could even understand that. This concept growth occurs rapidly in elementary school years, and as you increase knowledge of perception, attention, intentions, knowledge, and thinking, so it's all those processes that we think, your memory is going to improve, and you're going to become better thinkers, better, be able to do those abstract thinking because you understand the process of thinking, process of putting what I see out there, my perception. I'm paying attention to my environment and everything around it and taking in the subtle information, maybe the body language. I'm paying attention to their inflection of their voice, their intentions. I'm taking in the knowledge they're giving me, and then I'm putting that all in my brain and I'm thinking about it and processing it. I'm actually taking and putting it on my own filter and actually putting a judgment on it or my own perception. And then the more I do that and the more the child does that, the better, the more they're going to grow in their cognitive and knowledge awareness. And that's metacognitive. So just remember, it's thinking about thinking. So now we're going to go and look at theories of intelligence. What makes a person intelligent? So what they found is that hierarchical theories of intelligence have been criticized because they ignore cognitive development. And just a little history on cognitive development. In 1904, Spearman claimed that general factor intelligence is responsible for all mental tests. And then in 1941, Thurstone emphasized more specific components, word fluency, number proficiency, and reasoning. And then 1993 to 1996, Carroll proposed hierarchical theory. So what does this all mean? Well, we're going to take a look at it on the next slide, but this is leading into IQ and intelligence testing and what really constitutes being intelligent. So this is a diagram, a figure of general intelligence. So you're going to see different types of intelligence here. They have different levels that range from general intelligence to specific skills. So in the general intelligence, you're going to see that it's broken up into 8 broad categories of intellectual skills. And then those are broken into more skills that are more specific. So you could see fluid intelligence means that you have good sequential reasoning and inducive to reasoning, quantitative reasoning. So you're a very good reasoner. You can take information in and, you can see the big picture. You can reason and make conclusions. Crystallized intelligence, and I'm going to tell you, you're going to need to know the difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence. You're going to have a better understanding of printed language, language comprehension, vocabulary. So crystallized is a lot of language and comprehension. So, if you read and comprehend really well, this is going to be where you're going to have crystallized intelligence. General memory and learning is your memory span. Your associative memory, you have broad visual perception, so you're thinking that spatial and speed. Broad auditory perception, can you perceive sound discrimination? Broad retrieval ability, those are those creative, naming facility, ideational fluency. broad cognitive speediness. You have a rate of test taking. You're a good test taker. You can take it fast. You have good number facility, perceptual speed, and then processing speed. Simple reaction time, choice reaction time, and somatic processing speed. So this is kind of taking all that in, and they're saying this is what kind of makes up intelligence. Now, critics say that they ignore the research and they ignore some other theories of development. They ignore some of the other types of intelligence. So we're going to look on the next slide and see what that's about. So we're going to look at Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, addressing the criticism of hierarchical theory. So she looked at it more from a cognitive standpoint. And so she did studies of child development, brain damaged people, and exceptionally talented people. So she looked at all these people and determined how can we really determine intelligence? Is it just those kind of categories on that very, stringent list there, or is there more to being intelligent? And think about that. People that are really smart, but think about the people that are really, really good at other things. Is that a form of intelligence? So this is Gardner's theory of intelligence. So you're going to want to know what hierarchy intelligence is, just kind of general. You're going to definitely want to know what fluid and crystal intelligence is. And then you're going to want to know what is the difference between the two. So Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence is that they take in a broad category of not just, what we think of traditional intelligence, but think of like linguistics. Someone that knows the meaning of words, has the ability to use words to understand new ideas and using language to convey ideas. Logistical, logical, mathematical. If you ever met someone who's so good at math, just off the charts, but they're not very good at, maybe English or writing. Spatial, musical. So think of that child that learned to play the violin, at 5 and is, the musical genius, right? That's still a form of intelligence according to Gardner. Body kinesthetics. You know what that one? Those are our athletes, our dancers, the people that can, have great athletic ability. Your NBA players, your football players, your American ballet. They're way beyond us, right? So that's a body kinesthetic intelligence. Interpersonal. Identifying feelings, moods, motivations, and intentions in others. Who could you think of that? I think a great example would be someone like Oprah Winfrey, who can talk to the masses, right? Who has that great interpersonal and touch into a mass population of feelings. You have intrapersonal, ones, naturalistic, understanding the natural world, natural artifacts, people that succeed in natural phenomena. And then you have existential, considering ultimate issues such as purpose of life and the nature of death. Maybe Gandhi, right? Some of your, you can think of Billy Graham, some of your real spiritual leaders, right? That can just take it to the next level. So what she's decided is that, it's not all just, really hierarchical and, you have to be fluent and all these things. It's more of a, of a multiple intelligence, and she has 9. So think about these as the difference of more like skills and special attributes. So I want you to think about Gardner's 9, multiple intelligence. Can you think of somebody that fits one of those each one of those categories? Can you picture it? Think of someone that you know personally or is famous, right? Lots of different types of intelligence. So we're going to look at some other non-traditional theories of intelligence. So have you met somebody that, super book smart, but very awkward and can't read, the situation, can't, tell that, you're in my space, you need to back off. Well, one of that is emotional intelligence, the ability to use one's own and others' emotions effectively to solve problems and achieve happiness. And that's one of the big things, the EI intelligence, that workers are looking for, that they find that they have employees that can do the job, but they do not have the emotional intelligence to interact with other people and effectively read and perceive emotions to work effectively and produce outcomes. So they're looking for that combination of, are you intelligent and smart, and do you have that emotional intelligence? And it's really important as you guys go through your careers and you apply for things to really showcase that, so that employers know I'm not just getting someone who can do the job, but I'm going to have someone who can interact with their employees, work together as a team, and really succeed and excel at the job. So what we're going to look at here is that Sternberg's theory of successful intelligence is using abilities to achieve personal goals. So the three components, again, these are really important in today's society, going to apply for graduate school, nursing programs, jobs. You want to really highlight these skills. So do you have short-term goals? Do you have long-term goals for a successful career? Do you have an analytical ability? Think about if you have creative ability. Do you have practical ability? Analytical ability is being able to analyze a problem and find solutions. Creative ability is being able to deal adaptively with novel situations and problems. And practical ability is knowing which solution or plan will work. Which one is the most practical? So these are huge skills. Even if you're not the smartest person and may know the book knowledge, but if you can apply these skills, you're going to be so successful in whatever you do. And that's what employers and schools are looking at. So an example of analytical ability is maybe a 12-year-old can't get songs to download on his iPod, but he thinks about what could be the causes of why I can't get those to download. And then he reads those causes off and checks each one to ensure that he can get it to download. So he can look at the problem, think of solutions, and then apply a solution to the problem. Creative ability, one example would be, my iPad's broken, but I have to leave, on this trip, and I'm not going to have, that iPad to entertain me. What kind of things can I do instead to entertain me on a 2-hour trip? I don't have time to fix it, so maybe I'll, have another enjoyable activity. I'll read, I'll draw, I'll listen to music through, my headphones. So it's being creative to think outside the box. And if something isn't working, can I think of an outside the box solution? And then a practical is just, knowing what is the most practical solution if I have, what's going to cost the least amount of money, take the least amount of time, and get the best outcomes. So if you can do these three things, you're going to tend to have more satisfying relationships, greater self-esteem, and be more effective in the workplace. So just remember, according to Sternberg, successful intelligence is realized in people's pursuits of goals, short-term and long-term goals. And that goals differ among cultures, right? Depending on what environment you were raised in, we value different things. So is a successful intelligence the same in North America as it in an African tribal community? What would you look at? So first you want to look at, what are our goals? What is the goal to be successful in that culture or that country? And that's when it's going to determine that intelligence. So of course, North America, we live in a very urban, environment where, we're not going to have the same goals as an African tribal community that may need to work together to form, basic, tribal type goals. Second thing you want to look at is American intelligence tests assess intelligence that is valued in American societies. So if you've ever taken a test and maybe you're not from this country, or maybe you were raised and, your family raised in their, native cultures, tests aren't geared towards you. They're geared toward very middle of the line, American experiences. And what they're fine is that if you don't understand those experiences, you may not understand the question. So you're not really assessing the skill. You're just not quite understanding the experience to answer the question correctly, because you've never been cultivated or had that experience. So Sternberg believes that intelligence is defined by the demands of an environment or culture, and that is shaped in there. Okay. So and then intelligence tests they're very generalized, and they tend to be for a typical American, and they don't look at these different cultures. And if you don't understand the goals of each culture, how can you test their intelligence, right? Because each culture has a different value on what's important. We're going to move on and look at another group of psychologists, Binet and Simon, who looked at intelligence tests in the early 20th century French school. So this is in France. And they discovered some things that we use today. So you're going to want to understand what these terms mean. So the first thing we're looking at is mental age, and that's MA. So that's what that means is the difficulty of problems a child could solve correctly. So if you're taking a standardized test, which we all have, right? We've all been through school. We've all taken the STAR test or placement test. So what they're looking at, if a child could solve problems of a mental age higher than he or she's chronological age, which is CA, that's chronological age, so that's their actual age, they were considered bright. So that would mean a 6-year-old was solving problems that was made for a 9-year-old. So that would be a mental age would be higher than their chronological age. So mental age is, can they solve problems at the same age that they are, higher or lower? And they considered dual children had a lower mental age than their chronological age. So if you're that 6-year-old, what would be a dual child? What mental age would they have? So maybe possibly a 3 or a 4. So these they found were very age-specific tests. And they just had to determine what age or certain tasks, the child needs to be successful. So it's all based on kind of age-specific tasks. So that brings us to IQ, right? Now, most people have heard of intelligence tests, right? Your IQ. Well, this was from Stanford and Binet's study. And the Stanford-Binet is a revised and published version of Binet and Simon's original. And what that means, so IQ is your, intelligence, and that equals your MA, which is your mental age divided by your chronological age times 100. So this is important to understand this equation, and it's important to understand what the scores mean. This will definitely be on the exam. So a score of 100 is average. So do you know why? Because basically if I'm 6, so that's my chronological age, and I test, my mental age is 6, that equals 1. So 6 divided by 6 is 1. And if I times that by 100, that means I'm right at my age. So I'm average. I'm right where I need to be. I'm average. And they use this to compare IQs of children of different ages. So that allowed them to, be able to distinguish what the IQ of different children are at different ages. A modern version is still in use today, and it consists of cognitive and motor tasks ranging from extremely easy to extremely difficult. So definitely if you're going into psychology, you're definitely going to get a lot more on this. But just remember what IQ equals MA divided by CA times 100, and understand the numbers, because that's definitely going to be on the test, and you're going to have to determine if you got an IQ score of this, how would you grade that? So remember this for the test. So do the tests work? So what do you do? So through research, they found that IQ scores are fairly good at predicting school grades, achievement test scores, and number of schools of schooling. So if we go back to our correlation, so remember what that means. So correlations, remember, are -1 to 1, and closer you are to 1, the stronger the relationship. So they had a 0.5 to 0.7. So they have about an average to better than average correlation. So that's showing a pretty good relationship in IQ scores predicting these, achievements. But like any test, they're not perfect. Some students with high IQs do not do well in school and vice versa. So why do you think that? Well, some experts say that self-discipline predicts grades in school even better than IQ scores. So someone can be just a really hard worker, very self-determined, and do better than that person that's really intelligent, but just doesn't apply themselves, right? Doesn't want to do their homework, becomes lazy, becomes bored because it doesn't interest them. So it doesn't always predict well success. But it is a strong relationship in predicting those. So it's not a perfect relationship, but it is a strong relationship. So intelligence scores also predict job success. So high IQ scores mean one is more likely to make more money and have a high level job. So you're smart and you're more likely to, be successful. Just remember that even among peers with the same education, high IQ scores predict job performance and earnings, especially in complex jobs. So if you have a higher level job that requires higher thinking, maybe an engineer or, you're going to be, IQ is really important. You got to actually know the facts and what you're doing. That's definitely going to predict better success, opposed to maybe a job that is more simple and doesn't need as many skills or higher level of thinking. And IQ also predicts longevity. They found that people with higher IQ scores are less likely to smoke or drink alcohol, stay physically active, and eat healthy. So there goes to show you that, I guess, being smart has its benefits. So taking that into consideration, it'd be interesting to see the long-term effects of that, of people now with high IQ scores. Are we continuing that trend? So now we're going to take a look at how hereditary and environmental factors influence intelligence. So what they found was that following adoption, children's scores on intelligence tests tend to resemble the scores of their biological parents, not their adoptive parents. So what do you think that shows? What did we learn from our other lectures? If they favor their biological opposed to the environment of living with their adoption, right, it shows that the impact of heredity on intelligence. There's something in the genes that predisposes them to be able to be intelligent. So let's take a look at that. So now let's take a look at hereditary and environmental factors in intelligence. So like I said in the slide before, heredity does play a factor in intelligence, but environment is also crucial. But what they found in heredity studies, so remember, they're going to look at twin studies. They're going to take identical twins and fraternal twins, because identical twins have the same genes. And what they found is that identical twins were more alike in intelligence. Fraternal twins and other siblings were similar, but not as much as the twins. And adopted children were more like their biological than adoptive. So that tells us that definitely genes play a factor in this, but not the whole picture. So they found children with high IQ scores generally come from well-organized homes with appropriate play and materials. So if you have the proper environment, you can stimulate those intelligence factors. So what they found was they come from well-organized homes with appropriate play materials. Does that make sense, right? You have to, just like we talked about, you set up those play activities for motor and sensory skills. You've got to set up play activities for your brain, right? You've got to set up those language, those memory, those learning. So if they're setting up well-organized, consistent setup, they're going to have a better environment to practice and learn those intelligence skills. And they found that as this became more common in households, IQ scores tests rose in the 20th century. And can you think of one thing that was a big difference? They had one of the big programs, in the last 30, 40 years has been Head Start, the early preschool, TK, having high quality preschool programs. Head Start can help even the field, right? For those people that maybe are in homes that don't have as much education or don't have the knowledge on how to appropriately, play or set an environment, they're going to set that environment for them. So maybe in low-income children, in low-income homes, the children can go to Head Start, and they can do better in school and have higher test scores because they're setting up the environment to have appropriate materials. And what they found is high IQ scores when environmental intellectually stimulating areas. So that's the parents talking frequently to their children, cognitive games of puzzles and books, stimulating experiences outside the house, museums, plays, etc. So with the increase in IQ of the 20th century due to these environmental changes, Industrialization, you're going to have more intelligent workforce, all brings better schools, smaller families, and more stimulating leisure time. They're not just trying to survive, they're trying to thrive. So think about 100 years ago when maybe your grandparents are one of 15 because they had to work a farm or they had to support the family. Now we've become more industrialized. We don't have to grow food. We can buy it at the store. We've learned better, we become more intelligent, more education is given to more people, and we have smaller families. Then we can pay more attention because we're not having to spread the wealth out to 8 or 9 kids. We can actually have leisure time because we don't have to worry about, just trying to survive. So overall, that's the general picture as we evolved from the 1900s to the 20th century. Not for all, but that is what's made the change into helping bring in those higher IQ scores. So we're going to take a look at the impact of ethnicity and socioeconomic status. So research has shown that there is no evidence that some ethnic groups are genetically predispositioned to have higher IQs than other groups. So no evidence. Now, environmental factors can cause some racial groups in the U.S. to score differently in IQ tests based on their socioeconomic status, but it's not the ethnic groups. It's basically what opportunities do they have. If they're in a lower income where they just do not have the resources, then they're more likely to have a lower IQ score, but not based on your ethnic group. It's no genetic predisposition. So what they found is that Asian Americans and European Americans generally have higher economic status than African Americans and Latino Americans. So because they just have more opportunity, they tend to score higher on IQ tests. So remember, the differences in IQ scores are not genetic, but in part due to socioeconomic status. Higher socioeconomic status, the higher overall IQ score. But when same ethnicities come from same socioeconomic status, the differences of scores are reduced. It does not mean there is a smart gene, but rather that the environmental influences play a huge factor on giving those opportunities to develop intelligence. So if heredity is not involved, what factors contribute to group differences in test scores? So experience with test contents. So remember when I talked a little bit earlier about how tests are made and they're geared toward the typical American experience. So if you weren't raised in that or have that experience, you may not be as familiar with the test questions or understand exactly the scene that they're setting when they're asking the question, because they're generally based on this middle class experience. Test questions do not reflect experiences of lower socioeconomic families. So because they doesn't reflect their life, they may not understand the application of the actual question. Number 2 is test taking skills. So some cultures encourage collaborative problem solving. So remember we thought about that when we look at cultures. America's a very individual, we do work together as teams, but we're very American spirit individual. Whereas some cultures, think about maybe the African tribe we talked about earlier. They're working in a tribal community. They have to work together, collaborative problem solving. So that's how they think. So how are tests geared toward? More toward that individual question, not necessarily collaborative. So if they come from a culture like that, they may not understand, all the little idiosyncrasies of that test questions. And then they're wary of questions from unfamiliar adults. And when their test-taking skills are difficult, they might just say, I don't know by default, because they just don't understand the concept. And if they're wary of the questions from unfamiliar adults, so if they feel like that they don't, are comfortable with the adults, maybe they're the only, person that looks like you that's in there taking a test, and you're already nervous about taking the test, and you're just with unfamiliar adults, you might just not do well on your test taking. Because this may be the first experience, you might be the first one in your family to go to college, right? Or you may not see people that look like you in there. So that's why it's so important that we have a lot of different representations, because just that mental image, you've already set yourself up a little bit anxiety, right? And you're just weary because it's unfamiliar. And then the last one is stereotype threat. Anxiety increases if children are afraid to do poorly as a result of the stereotype associated with their race. So basically what that means is affirmation helps decrease this anxiety in a study with African American children when reminding themselves of their values and why they are important. So if you remind the children, why they're important, no matter of their race, and that they can actually do it, it helps decrease the anxiety and they do better. It's reduced when children are told this is an opportunity to learn. So when they're just saying this, you're going to take this test, we want to see how, we want to see, if you can take this test and learn something from it. Takes the pressure off, right? If I told you, oh, you're just going to see how, just see what you can learn from this. And I'm not going to, necessarily grade it. You wouldn't have that pressure and you're going to be more relaxed and maybe do better. So when you're just taking the opportunity to learn new things and not measure ability, you tend to relax and perform better on exams. So if we know this is a problem, then how can we interpret test scores of children from different cultures? A low score indicates that based on current skills, a child is not likely to perform well in an American school. So we're just testing how would they perform in an American school. So improving children's skills improves their school and performance. And all ethnic groups have children who do extremely well and extremely poorly on tests. So it's not just a problem for one ethnic group. So we need to find solutions on how do we make tests better and how do we improve the skills needed to improve school performances, right? How many times have you had teachers, teach how to the test? Like if you're going to teach a STAR exam in elementary school. So you have to learn how to take a test. You have to learn and understand the way to take a test, not just the skills. And you need to learn the skills on how to, improve that performance. Most intelligent tests predict success in a school environment that has middle-class values. Some low scores may be from the bias, but does not mean that they are destined to fail. They need to have intervention to understand the values of American schools. So just understanding the way American schools test, giving them schools to take those tests, you'll see an improvement. So now we're going to take a look at gifted and creative children. So traditionally, giftedness is defined by an IQ greater than or equal to 130. So that means that you are, super intelligent. So remember, that's MA divided by CA times 100. Now, it also includes, remember, we don't want to just look at the hierarchical intelligence. We want to look at Gardner's, 9 multi-areas of intelligence. So ability in art, music, dance. There's several prerequisites for exceptional talent. Child's love for the subject and desire to master it. So if someone's going to think about you've got that violin, that gifted violin player that is, a savant. First of all, they've got to love to play the violin and really desire to do good at it. So if they could be the best violin, potentially the best violin player ever. They don't love it and practice it and make it their own, they're never going to become gifted. Number 2, they need to be with talented teachers from a young age. They need to have the instruction from very talented. So talent begets talent. So if you have a very gifted violin player, but they don't get to play or be exposed to that talent, they're never going to reach they're going to have a harder time and may never reach that gifted stage. And they need to have support and help from committed parents, right? They need to have parents that will take them to these instructors, will give them time to practice, that encourages them. So, you can even think of a gymnast, right? Think of how many hours they spend in the gym, how much love they must have for doing that, and then how they have to many times go to move out of their home and live with other families to get instruction from talented young age. That's what it sometimes takes to be gifted. Not just be successful, but gifted and, above the normal. And if you have exceptional talents, they'll wither if not nurtured. So if I took that violin player and I never had him play the violin, he's never going to be a gifted violinist. He may have the potential, but if they're not nurtured, they will wither. Oh, no. So now we're going to look at gifted and creative children. So traditionally, gifted is defined by IQ greater than 130, greater than or equal to 130. So just remember that MA over CA times 100. But now it also includes, right, what Gardner's 9 levels of multiple intelligence, exceptional ability in art, music, dance, etc. So there's several prerequisites for exceptional talent. So, and that's that ability substantially above average. So you must have a passion for the subject and desire to master it. So think of that violin, savant who can, who's a master violinist at age 7, or your gymnast. So they have to love it and be wanting to practice it and put the time in. If they don't, and they have the potential, if they don't love it, they're not going to put the time in to get gifted. Second, instruction. They have to be with talented teachers from a young age. So you can have the most potential to be the greatest violinist or gymnast, but if you're not putting that environment with a teacher that is exceptionally talented to help them, they're never going to get to that next level. They become good, but never to that gifted level. So even you can imagine some of the gymnasts, right? They go and they travel to get to these talented teachers. And they need support and help from committed parents. So no child can do it alone. They need to have the parents be able to take them to their practices, give them the time to practice, money, right? Some parents even move so their kids can get to those exceptional, those talented teachers. So you have to keep all that. They have to have curriculum that is challenging and complex. They need to be around like-minded peers that stimulate their talent, and they need to have teachers who foster that talent. And exceptional talent will wither if not nurtured. So if I have that gymnast who has great talent, great potential, great muscle strength, but if never exposed and stops, going to gymnastic practice and then decides to do it 10 years later, they're not going to be that gifted if it's because they haven't nurtured it. They haven't refined it and made it to that gifted level. And then just remember that the stereotype of gifted children is that they're emotionally troubled, that they're so involved in their sports that they're emotionally, or they're so one-track minded on their subjects to perfect it that they can at times be emotionally troubled. But what they found is that if fostered correctly and that they get a balance, they tend to be more mature and have successful careers and relationships because they learn discipline and sacrifice and a hard work ethic to be successful. They just have to have that balance and foster to have those social skills and emotional skills develop as well. So remember that intelligence relies on convergent thinking, and that's the ability to give the correct answer to a standard question that does not involve creativity. And then creativity relies on divergent thinking, and that's thinking in novel and unusual directions, must be cultivated. So intelligence, convergent thinking is like facts. You give me a question and I can tell you the fact. It's not creative, it's just hard and concrete. But creativity, you're going to take me an unusual decision and I'm going to think about it, and I have to apply something. So it has to be practiced and cultivated. So one way to measure creativity, so this would be a child, is to determine how many original responses children can make to a specific stimulus. So if they were just giving a circle, how much could they get? So this would be a very creative child, right? Look at all the different pictures that they took from that circle. So that's one way to test younger children. So now we're going to take a look at children with disabilities. So we looked at intelligence, IQ, information processing, how to remember all that. So what happens when that doesn't all come together? So first thing we're going to look at is intellectual disability. And the definition of that is of substantial limitation in intellectual ability and problems adapting to an environment. So you want to make sure you understand what this is for the exam. So these are the criteria. So you have to have these to be considered have an intellectual disability. It must emerge before age of 18. So if something starts happening after 18, it's not considered an intellectual disability. Your IQ score is less than or equal to 70. And you have a lack of conceptual skills, practical skills, and social skills. So you just have a lack of overall skills in intelligence. So an example would be Down syndrome, and it's a condition that leads to intellectual disability. So a lack of conceptual skills would be Literacy and understanding of money and time. Social skills would be those interpersonal skills, that way we talk to each other, knowing, being able to, read people's cueing. Do you talk out of turn? Are you able to do, have a, back and forth conversation? And practical skills, personal grooming and occupational skills. Can you do all that independently? Do you need help? So looking at all those things consist of intellectual disability, and you must have all three to be considered that. So the 4 factors that place people at risk for intellectual disability are biomedical factors, which are Down syndrome, also malnutrition and traumatic brain injury if it occurs before 18. Social factors is poverty. So if you are just thinking about trying to survive, you may not have the environmental factors that help with that intelligence. Also, a social factor would be impaired parent-child interactions. You might be neglected, as in the behavioral factors shown. And domestic violence would be another behavioral factor. So risk for intellectual disability grows as more of these factors are present. So you're going to want to know the difference between intellectual disability and learning disabilities, LD. They're not the same, and you're going to want to know the difference between them for the test. So children with learning disabilities, do you think of some learning disabilities? Right, dyslexia would be one, as you can see below in the slide. But learning disabilities have difficulty mastering an academic subject, and they have normal intelligence. Remember, intellectual disability, they have below average. They have below 70, even below average, below average. But learning disabilities have normal intelligence. They just have difficulty mastering an academic subject. And they are not suffering from other conditions that could explain poor performance, like poor eyesight, poor hearing, inadequate instruction. So 5% of American children have a learning disability. So you may have one, you may know someone that has one. Some of them are developmental dyslexia, impaired reading comprehension, mathematical learning disabilities, etc. And each type has its own causes and treatments. So for developmental dyslexia, they have difficulty in reading individual words. They benefit from experiences that help identify subtle but important differences in language sound and from explicit instruction on the connections between letters and their sounds. And with this help, they can read more effectively. So the letters sometimes get flipped. They learn techniques on how to identify that, and they can improve their performance. Others may have difficulty with reading comprehension, and this is difficulty understanding words that have been read successfully. So they can't picture the meaning of the word. So they may read something, but they just can't put a picture. So every time you read, it should be like a movie in your brain. You should be able to picture what the words are saying. So if someone that has a problem with reading comprehension, words don't have meaning. There's no picture. So what they have to do, they may have limited spoken vocabulary. So remember when we learned about early on development, children need a lot of exposure to spoken vocabulary. They would benefit from techniques that help understand meaning, picturing what they read. So they just have to put a lot of meaning to the words. And then mathematical learning disability is difficulty with math concepts, sometimes called developmental dyscalculia. And 5 to 10% of young children progressing slowly in ability to count, add, and subtract between 2nd and 3rd grade using inefficient methods such as using their fingers to solve 5 plus 9. They may have less number sense, impaired memory or recalling number facts, or working memory and processing speed. So mathematics is a huge concept all to deal with, but you're going to notice a lot of this in 2nd and 3rd graders. If you notice, they're still using their fingers to count, add and subtract, recalling number facts. So these are learning disabilities. Remember, they're different from intellectual disabilities, and you need to know the difference. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We're going to take a look at that next. So that's approximately 3 to 7% of children are diagnosed with ADHD. So you may have ADHD, you may know somebody. It's very common, right? It's kind of a buzz diagnosis. Boys outnumber girls 4 to 1. That doesn't mean girls can't get it, but they tend to, boys just tend to get it more. We talked about this a little bit earlier, how boys tend to be more fidgety, have different difficulty concentrating just by the way that they develop. So they just makes them more prone to get ADHD. So when you understand the development, you can understand some of these learning disabilities, diagnosis, because you're understanding how boys and girls differ in their development and how important that prenatal and early development does play on these later developmental stages. So remember, ADHD is characterized by these 3 symptoms, so know them. Number 1, hyperactivity. It's unusual, energetic, and unable to keep still, right? That fidgety, it's always moving, difficult to keep still. Especially unable to control fidgeting when they need to, right, in a classroom. Inattention, cannot focus or switch tasks easily. This is really, again, is another thing they see in school, can't focus in the class or complete schoolwork. The last one is impulsivity. May shout out answers in class, may not take their turn, they act before thinking, may run into traffic without looking. So they're characterized by these symptoms. But just remember, not all have the same symptoms and to the same degree. And many may have a combo of 2, but may not have another one. So no ADHD may present the same, but they're going to have some similarities, but they're not going to be exactly the same, and they can have a combination. And this can carry on into adolescents and young adults with, if not treated, few complete college and some will have work and family related problems. It's not something that goes away. It is definitely something that they will have to deal with their entire life. So what they found is that heredity and prenatal exposure to alcohol and drugs are a factor that places children at risk for ADHD. So you can think when we learned about those teratogens, right? So one thing that can happen is that difficulty to stay on task, attention, fidgeting. That's why it's so important to look at that prenatal development, because like I said earlier in the semester, it's going to affect later stages of development. So like I said in the earlier slide, do children grow out of ADHD? More than likely, no. More than half still have problems in adolescence and young adulthood. And it's the growing awareness of ADHD has led to a rise in diagnosis, especially in girls and adolescents, right? We're just more aware. And because we're more aware, we're seeing the symptoms earlier and we're not brushing them off. And we're looking in girls. So some treatments for ADHD include stimulant drugs such as Ritalin. So you may have heard of that. So what that does is it stimulates the part of the brain that inhibits hyperactivity. So Ritalin actually stimulates the brain that stops hyperactivity and impulsivity behavior. It activates the hormones that control non-stimulating behavior. So it's a stimulant that works on activating non-stimulating hormones. It has a calming influence on children, allowing for improvement in attention. Also, you have psychosocial treatments, which improve cognitive and social skills. They're usually delivered in the classroom or by parents and peers. For example, children are taught for reading instructions before starting assignments. They're given copies of strategies. They're reinforced by others by inhibiting impulsivity, and hyperactive behavior. So a lot of coping strategies on how to actually, deal with these symptoms in a social setting and where they have to perform and stay on task. And what they found is that a combination of treatments seems to work the best. So just being on the drugs is not going to help. And, just having treatment sometimes doesn't help. But when you combine them together, you're going to get the calming effect from the drug with the behavioral modifications and strategies that are going to help you be successful. So medication is best for treating the hyperactivity. Academic and social schools improve the most with a combination of medication and psychosocial treatments. So now let's take a look at reading. So reading is very important. It's an essential skill for us to comprehend and learn and acquire knowledge. So what are the essential skills for learning to read? So the first thing is knowledge of individual letters and word forms. And you need to be sensitive to language sounds. So phonological awareness, ability to distinguish sounds in spoken words. So that's why it is so important when we learn how, when we were teaching in last week's lecture, teaching language to babies, how they learn words before they know what they look like, right? So the more vocabulary they have in spoken words, the more pictures in their brains that they can describe them before they even can read them. But since they know them and have that vocabulary and understand them, when they learn to read, they're going to be able to do much, much better. So you need to read to your children, play with letters like the magnetic ones like on the refrigerator. Practice writing letters produces better readers. Pronunciation of letters in English is inconsistent, so that makes learning to read more difficult than in some other language. And reading to children prepares them for reading. So language sounds, syllables that have a vowel and may not have a consonant, sounds of the D, then the U, then the ST. So you want to make sure that you're really enunciating that. You want to mix it up with children. You want to find out what dust is without the D. So you just want to learn all the sounds. So reading to children helps. And, like Hooked on Phonics, right? We learn all that stuff, those videos. You want to learn word patterns, hat, bat, cat, sight words, all that stuff, but reading and practicing and incorporating, games and writing and all that's going to help you become a better reader. So, like I said in the last slide, one of the things that children need to learn is some of those sight words because the English language doesn't make sense. So they begin to recognize words just by sight. So think of the first books you read, right? Dick and Jane, was one of the first ones in the 50s, but think of those, Bob books or, were very, very basic. So they don't necessarily understand the link between letters and sounds yet, but they know they can, if they saw bat, they know that that is bat. They just memorize it. And in kindergarten, they learn more than 100 sight words to memorize. So reading is part phonics and part memorization of sight words. And then they learn the rules. There's steps in true reading. How do we become better readers? There's rules to reading. First one is sounding out letters to decode words. Words then placed in long-term memory, right? We go phonics. Everybody knows the Hooked on Phonics. So once you decode words are just symbols. They're symbols for objects, people, places, things, verbs, actions. So once you can decode that and then remember it, then you're going to be a better reader. Context makes a huge difference, right? Helps to recognize words and their meaning. So if you're reading something and you don't know the word, but you know what everything else in that sentence means, then you're going to understand, maybe you can draw a conclusion. Oh, this word means that because this is, this is saying, let's go take the Anna Cruiser to the beach to ride over the hills. Well, the Anna Cruiser, I don't know what in the world that is, but it must be some kind of vehicle because I know you ride it over the hills. So I can deduce, I can put it in context and know that that's probably what that type of meaning is. So as they're starting to read and sound out words, they're going to first, their first effort with reading is going to try to retrieve the first, you're going to try to retrieve the word first. And if they don't know it, they're going to sound it out. And if they don't understand it there, they're going to ask for help. And that will increase the long-term memory storage for retrieval. So first they see if they remember it. Second, they sound it out. If they can't sound it out, they ask for help. And then that whole process helps them remember it for next time. So how do children improve their reading? Because their reading comprehension. Because reading words is one thing, being able to recognize them, but to understand. Remember that problem of one of the learning disabilities is not being able to comprehend or picture what you read. So and a lot of times that's a big problem as they go into middle school, is that they can't understand what they're reading. So then that causes problems long term, even into college, right? So how do children improve their reading comprehension? Well, several factors. So one is they become more skilled with recognizing words, allowing effort to be devoted to comprehension. So when you have a huge vocabulary and you know the words, then you're not thinking about how to say them or what that word is. You already know it. So then you're thinking about what does that mean? I'm already starting the picture. They acquire more knowledge of their worlds. So as they become more in the environment, greater vocabulary, they're setting their spoken language is becoming better, and they understand what words are. They have more pictures. They're going to be better readers. They use more appropriate reading strategies. So right, they sound it out. They recognize the word. They sound it out. They put it in context. They use all those strategies, and then they build up vocabulary for those words, and then pictures. And then they monitor their comprehension better with experience. So the more experience, so think of a child that has no experiences, not read to very often, sits at home all day. They're not going to have a huge vocabulary or even be able to picture any of these things that they're reading because they just have not been exposed to it. And then think of that child that goes to museums, plays outside, has siblings that talk, parents that talk, gets read to all the time, goes into imaginary worlds. They're going to have much better comprehension because their environment and their pictures that they have to draw from are much more in their memory. So just remember, skilled reading comes from accurate decoding coupled with understanding the meaning of the decoded word, and it improves with practice. Language skills improve, they get bigger vocabulary to draw from. And remember, in third grade, decoding prospers, but they do not have real meaning until fifth grade with understanding. So some are really good readers before, but when they get fifth grade is when they do really start to develop that proficiency in reading and understanding, along with increased understanding of grammar and rules of sentences. And then they know more words and they can focus on the meaning of the entire sentence. Psychological, social, physical words, more life experiences. Words have more meaning as they grow. They will understand more. Sentences about elections and politics from a fourth grader to high schooler, right? It's going to mean differently. They're going to have more experiences. So we think about election now. You ask a fourth grader, you ask a high schooler, they're going to use different vocabulary, different comprehension. So it evolves. So the more they read, the more experiences they have, the more they're going to be better readers. Use proper reading strategies, reading a textbook versus for fun, organization, memorization, all those things we talked about in this lecture. And they're going to monitor their comprehension so that if they don't understand the sentence, they'll read it again or they'll get help. So now let's take a look at writing. So there's reading comprehension, and now writing is a whole other skill, right? So it improves with age as children gain more knowledge to incorporate into their writing. It requires organization that improves with age, right? Some of us still struggle with writing. We might not be natural writers, but can learn techniques to be better writers. Young children use a knowledge-telling strategy, so they write down information on a topic as it's retrieved from memory. Older children rely on a knowledge-transforming strategy, deciding what to include and how to organize it. So younger children, so if you're thinking 8-year-old versus a 12-year-old, they're going to look at stuff very differently, right? An organized material in younger children, they're going to be very fact-based, descriptive. They're going to list the knowledge. It rained today. I went to school. We took a math test. It's going to be very literal and almost like verbatim, day of day. Now, an older child will make it into a structured topic, right? We've learned that topic, outline, facts, and purpose. So they may not include everything they did that day. They're just going to take the important things, make it into a topic, considering the needs, interests, and knowledge of the anticipated audience. So they're going to make it make sense and condense. So that's the difference between a young child, knowledge-telling strategy, just facts and lots of just listing. Older strategy, they're going to take that facts, make it into an outline, make it have purpose and understanding, and just detail the important stuff. So writing requires more elements than speaking, right? So we can talk, and you might talk very eloquently, but in writing, you have to remember punctuation, spelling, forming letters, etc., right? Quality of writing tends to suffer until all of those elements are mastered. So if you're not good with spelling, punctuation, forming letters, you're not going to be a quality writer. And mastering writing is a challenge task that extends into adulthood. So some of us right in this class still are not natural writers. We really have to work on it. It's a skill that develops the more you practice. So you can be taught to write better with building blocks and effective writing tools, strategies for planning, drafting, and revising text. So this is a writing diagram to teach us to be better strategies with writing. We can even use this in today's writing, right? If you're writing your PowerPoint topic, presentation. So POW and tree. So POW is pick my idea, organize my notes, write and say more. And then tree is how do you structure that? I'm going to have a topic sentence telling me what you believe. I'm going to have a R, a reason. 3 or more, why do I believe this? My support, right? That's in the trunk. why will my readers believe this? E is explain. So you're going to have your reasons. You're going to say more about each reason. You're going to explain the reasons in detail. And E is your ending, you'll wrap it up. So it's kind of you tell your topic, give your facts, tell them why your facts are important, and then kind of wrap it up and say how it all pertains back to the topic sentence. And this is considered a self-regulated strategy for development in writing. So we went over reading, we went over writing. Now let's think about math skills. So a lot of us are challenged with math. How do we learn math and how do we develop those higher level skills? So as we learned in last chapter 5, right, children begin to learn to count and add and learn those basic principles. They first learn with using their fingers, so they put the object with the number. Around first grade, children switch to counting silently. They can count in their head. They can picture it. By 8 or 9 years old, addition comes from memory, so they don't need to use their fingers. So remember that 3rd grade is when if you still see children using their fingers to add or subtract, they're having difficulty, learning disability with their math. And skills continue to improve as children progress through school. So, right, they're going to speed up, they're going to get better memorization, they're going to go from addition, subtraction, to multiplying, to dividing, to algebra, trig, and calculus. Amazing, right, what we learn from just our basic addition to all the way to calculus. Think about the process, how you learn math, and if you had any of these difficulties. So now we're going to talk about what makes a school effective and what makes teachers effective. So if we need to learn how to read and write and do math, we need to be put into schools that help us make us be successful. So what are some characteristics of successful schools? So staff and students who understand that every student's academic excellence is the primary goal of the school. That's imperative. The academic excellence goal, the schools should primarily be focused on instruction, and students are recognized for their academic accomplishments. The school needs to be safe and nurturing school climate. They need to have that so students can devote energy to learning, and if they feel safe and the staff cares, then they're more likely to succeed. Can you think of some recently, especially in these times, right, where school has not felt safe? We can think of all the school shootings, right? Or if you're in what if your school's in a high crime area and there's a lot of drive-by shootings, or it's not safe to walk to school. So if you're not feeling safe and nurtured, you're already anxious, you're not setting up a success. Parents are involved. So there's a formal arrangement between parents and teachers. There's parent-teachers conferences. There's parent volunteers in the class. And it just shows parents and teachers are committed to child success. And then progress is monitored. So they're going to monitor the progress of the students, the teachers, and the program so that they know if they're monitoring progress, gives them objective measurements that reflect academic goals, and it lets them see where they're not meeting that. And so they can always reevaluate and change and modify to continue to reach these goals. Can you imagine if we didn't have some of these aspects, or maybe you went to a school that didn't? What were some of the effects that you saw when schools are not successful? So another thing is teachers that stand out above the rest. Have you had a teacher that stood out from the rest? Can you think of your favorite teacher? Now think of why were they your favorite? I had one of my favorite teachers was 2nd grade. She was awesome. We had, rewards for being good. We had rewards for doing well on our tests. She walked us to Thrifty ice cream. I mean, I love that class. Another teacher that was one of my favorites was my Algebra 2 and calculus teacher in high school. She made math fun. She made it so that I was going to understand. She was so positive and upbuilding. So what makes a successful teacher? So successful teachers use several methods for promoting students' achievements. They manage the classroom effectively so they can focus on instruction, so that they're controlled the discipline. There's not a lot of disruption so students can learn. They take responsibility for students' learning and know that they will learn when taught well. So they take responsibility. They want to make sure that what they do has an impact, and if it doesn't, they're adjusting. And they emphasize mastery of topics. So individual teachers have the most impact. So each teacher can make a huge impact on a student. I'm sure you found that you've had good teachers that have really made an impact, and some that were really bad that, you felt like you've lacked some learning. I had a Spanish teacher that was so preoccupied with her dating life in high school that I felt like I really lost out on an education, where I didn't get the full learning with my Spanish. So you can have it both ways. And if they're managing the classroom, they're spending less time on discipline and more time on teaching. They're going to, instructional time is not wasted and students learn more. If the students don't understand topics, they repeat it, they create new instructions, they keep modifying to find something that works, to take responsibility for students' learning. And they're giving their students time to understand, practice, and apply the topic so they can master each topic. Successful teachers also teach actively. They encourage interaction, participation in class activities. They pay careful attention to pacing. They're slow enough for students can understand a new concept, but not so slow that they get bored. So they find that correct balance. And they value tutoring in small groups to give instructions on what is not understood. And they let peers help each other, and they both learn more. And they teach students techniques for self-monitoring and managing their own learning. They teach them how to be good students, how to take tests, how to study correctly, to how to monitor if they're retaining the information, so that they can improve in their learning abilities and take responsibility for their education. So now we're just going to look at physical development in this age group, the middle age. So as you can see from these charts, height and weight increase steadily during the elementary school years. Most gain about 8 pounds and 2 to 3 inches per year. Most of the height comes from the legs, not the trunk. And this might be, if you've ever had kids, or you were a kid when you remember when you were a kid, you tend to outgrow your pants and shoes more rapidly than maybe your t-shirts. So just remember, most of the height comes from the legs, not the trunk. That might be a test question. And this is all during those elementary school years. You can see from 6 to 12. So remember that girls enter puberty before boys on average, and they tend to be taller than boys at ages 11 and 12. So the average 7 to 10-year-old needs about 2,400 calories a day to support growth, because they're growing. Remember we said how much they're growing, 2 to 3 inches, about 9 pounds a year. In comparison, the preschool child needs about 1,500 calories a day to support growth and provide energy. So about 900 more calories between this age, because they're growing rapidly. And it depends on age and size. With the 2,400, it could be as low as 1,700 up to 3,300 calories a day. But the average is about 2,400 between 7 and 10. And a well-balanced diet is necessary. So they found that you should not skip breakfast, because it can result in attention and memory problems. You need that nutrition to stimulate those connections. Protein especially helps stimulate neural connections. And you should eat from all food groups. Breakfast should provide a quarter of the calories for the day. So how many of you eat breakfast? How many of you guys ate breakfast when you were in middle school? I know I didn't. So definitely something that when I think back of it, maybe I'd be a little bit smarter, right? But breakfast is the most important meal of the day, like our mom said, and this is what the studies supported. So this shows the development of motor skills. So you can see between the ages of 6 and 11, they're going to throw, whether you're a girl or a boy, you're going to throw the ball farther, and you're going to jump farther. So between 6 and 11, children's motor skills improve considerably. Why do you think that? right? You have greater size, greater strength, because we're eating all those calories and we're growing rapidly. So if you have greater size and strength, so just like an adult, as the adult has better skills, you're going to have you're going to contribute to improved motor skills, agility, balance, and coordination. And by 11, you're going to throw a ball at least 3 times farther than at 6 and jump twice as far. So not only do motor skills or gross motor skills improve, but fine motor skills also improve. Remember, that's your hands and your gripping and dexterity in your hands. So why is that important during this time? What were we going over? Writing, right? Children's handwriting demonstrates increased control. I had horrible handwriting. I used to get graded all the time down for that. How is your handwriting? How is your fine motor control? So it's a huge thing during this time period. And activities such as playing the piano, typing, writing, puzzles are great because they require fine motor and improving that, which is so important for their handwriting and control. Girls tend to have better fine motor skills and to be better at gross motor skills that require flexibility. So if you've probably seen that girls tend to have more flexibility, guys tend to have more strength. Um, Boys are better at gross motor skills that require strength. So we think about how girls and boys develop. That makes sense because they're experiencing those areas maybe that support that. Um, right? Experience during motor skills is crucial. So how do you build up that coordination, endurance, balance? You practice, right? And boys tend to be put into more sports than girls. Girls and parents also often believe that physical activity is less important for girls, and it deprives them of opportunities to develop motor skills. That's becoming less. Definitely, girls' sports and girls' activity are definitely gaining momentum. And I know I played a sport since I was in kindergarten all the way through college. Actually, played a year of BC here way back in the day, but I was always, because I just followed my brother, so I was always put into sports with my brother. But as a whole, right, girls tend to be put in more social type stuff. So, but it's definitely changing than from 30, 40 years ago. So just remember, as they enter puberty, girls' bodies have proportionally more fat and less muscle than do boys. This is why boys can hang by their hands or arms much longer than girls. So I know I could never do a pull-up, but when you think about that, that's why boys tend to have better upper body strength. They running and throwing and catching body composition does not play a part. So if you want to look at how boys and girls play at school, so this is what they found. Boys tend to play physical sports, basketball, football, something with fitness. Girls tend to be on swing sets, jumping rope, or talking in small groups. So you could see why boys just have more motor skill development because they just have more exposure to it. But that's changing as we're changing the environment. So what they found is that being physically active helps promote mental growth. So why do you think that? Because if you're pumping oxygen, you're getting more oxygen to the brain, and the brain to grow, be stimulated, to make those connections needs increased oxygen. So when you're physically active, it helps promote that mental growth because physiologically you're giving it the nutrients it needs. So what they found is that fewer than half of school children meet standards of fitness. And childhood obesity is also an epidemic in the US. So what contributes to these low fitness levels? So you've taken PE in high school, probably done some PE in middle school and elementary school. What did they make you do? Did you have to be really physically active? So, when I gave this class, taught it last year, some of them said they didn't even have to, after a couple of years, you don't have to do PE. They didn't have to do as much in PE. So what they found is that physical education classes meet rarely, if at all, and children spend too much time in front of the television or computer. So when we think of these fitness tests, can you remember doing your fitness test? Usually it consists of a mile, pull up, a sit up. Maybe you had PE 1 to 2 times a week, even in class, spending half the time standing around and not exercising. Does that sound familiar? So think about your PE experience, and did it meet the goals of physical fitness? And did you choose to spend time in front of the TV, or if you did, is that why you aren't physically, is why children aren't physically fit? Is it because it's just a cycle? They don't want to do the activity and choose to be in front of the TV, and the more they do that, the harder it is. So definitely it's a lot different. When I was a kid, we just all went out and played. We didn't have any of these, electronic devices. Now you look around, every kid's on an electronic device. Is that taking away the physical activity? And fitness? Something for us to take a look at, right? So now that we've discovered the problem, how can children become more fit? So here's just some of the guidelines. Schools should offer physical education classes more frequently. Schools can offer activities that promote lifelong fitness. So instead of teaching you some random pickle game that you may never use and that you need to have a partner for, they should teach you skills that you can do by yourself and promote lifelong learning. So teach you how to make a running program, maybe a swimming program, walking, tennis, something that you can set into your own program and carry it on once you're out of school. And then families can encourage physical activity over sedentary electronic activities. Or you could use your electronics for physical activity, like the Wii, right? You can play tennis or do, different activities, or Dance Revolution. You're still doing your electronics, but you're moving at the same time. So there's definitely solutions. What can you think of? A creative way to get, something that you like and some physical activity. So just remember that the benefits of children's participation in sports, number one, exercise and increase motor skills. So they're going to improve um, overall health, and they're going to have just better development of motor skills. They're going to develop self-esteem and initiative. I know when I played sports, it helped me feel confident, it helped me have discipline, learn a new task so I can carry it over into my other schooling or other things. It helps with overall success. You learn to be social skills and cooperation, right? You interact with your teammates, how to work together as a team. Cognitive skills in a practical way. You have to think about strategy and, how to play, and then make it practical. So that all those skills to carry over into daily life, work, all those things that are, real life skills. But there are some potential hazards. Can you think of some? So sometimes participation in sports is linked to antisocial and delinquent behavior. Um, Winning sometimes is emphasized in kids so much that they turn to burnout and quit physical activity. They become inward. Um, but some of these hazards can be minimized with effective and encouraging coaches and parents who emphasize learning new skills. And when sports are combined with other activities such as school, religious, or youth groups, they can be very beneficial. We just have to make sure that we don't take it as life and death, and we don't put pressure on these young children um, to succeed at all costs. So think about a coach that you had that was awesome and supportive, and think about a coach that, was severe and extreme and winning at cost. You can think of the good and bad experiences. So what they found is that coaches that encourage players and give positive feedback are crucial in allowing children to benefit from sports. Coaches and parents must have realistic expectations and praise children's efforts. Must keep in mind that it should be for fun for the child, and still be progressing towards goals, progressing towards winning, but that winning isn't everything, so that they're not so devastated and have anxiety when they don't win. Learning how to lose is just as much of a skill as learning how to win, to be successful in life. So that's the end of chapter 6. We're also going to be covering chapter 7, so I'll see you there, and until then, take care.